morning, everyone. Morning again, and good evening, depending upon which part of the world are you guys joining from. I'm joining from Bangalore. I'm Deepesh. Uh, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Move and Sync. Move and Sync has been a very large office commute platform. Recently, we added a workspace management solution called Work and Sync, which lets companies do a return to the office and adopt a flexi or a hybrid work policy. I think with that context, I would open our discussion with Dean Stanberry. Welcome, Dean.
Thank you, Deepesh. Good to see you again and be on. Thank you for inviting me to participate today. Dean Stanberry, I am first vice chair of the International Facility Management Association's Global Board of Directors. I've had two careers. I actually spent the early part of my career in IT, running large-scale data centers, and then I took a right turn into real estate and facilities. And I knew a lot about critical infrastructure, but I didn't know that much about office environments. That's when I found IFMA. I joined a local chapter. I started getting in some education, and one day, I was asked if I wanted to join a committee. And so I did, and now I'm first vice chair of the global board. So obviously I couldn't stop raising my hand to volunteer, but I'm happy to be here today and participate in this discussion. Thank you, Deepesh.
Sure, you welcome, and I am certainly excited by around 3 decades of experience you have across organizations, as you mentioned, which while they were primarily in the US, but had a lot of global exposure for you. And obviously we've been discussing about this. So it's very good to be here. And we would sort of spend our time talking about what are the organizations trying to do with the RTO, and then redefining goals and redesigning workspaces. But for the audience, just some housekeeping announcements. As a part of our discussion, we will talk about it, but you can post your questions in the Q&A section, and we will take them towards the end of the discussion. But feel free to post them. I do see already some questions, but yeah, let's get started, and I'll take the questions as they come. So, Dean, I think there's been a lot of debate around this return to office and RTO. And I think just to give you a quick perspective, before I ask you for your views on it, between India and the US, I've seen a lot of different trends. Specifically in India, right now, the RTO, if I compare it to the pre-COVID level, is more than 50%. And just now we finished our big festival, Diwali, and RTO in the last 2 weeks from 50% has gone to close to 70%. And we certainly see that coming January, it probably would be 100% or maybe more than 100%. So that's been the context of this side of the world. Now, there has been a lot of debate of, I think, return to office. So what are your observations on the RTO trends and the behavioral pattern of the employees?
Thank you for that. Well, again, I live in the United States, and so a lot of my perspective is, of course, based on what I see in the U.S. But what I think that also mirrors a little bit of what is occurring in Europe. So, even different regions of the world can have some similarities. But I also have noticed that, it's very different in India. So there's slightly different perspective. According to Global Workforce or Workplace Analytics, in 2018, there was about 4.3 million people in the US that worked from home at least half the time, which makes up about 3.2% of the US workforce. Post-pandemic, that percentage has risen to 26%. And of those participant remote workers, about 40% of those believe they were more productive working from home as opposed to working in the office. So while that's a significant number, that alone doesn't really make a compelling case for remote work. But if you think about it, even at all that, this debate is centered around about 1/4 of at least the US workforce. So there's a lot of debate and discussion around 25% of the workers. The person making my meal at the fast food restaurant cannot do that job remotely. So there's lots and lots of positions that are just absolutely not eligible for remote work. I believe there's a lot more deep-rooted issues driving the remote work sentiment, and it may be a few years before the social scientists can sort out all the complexities of the social and organizational dynamics. But I want to share some words from colleague Kay Sargent, who's a director of workplace at HOK, leading international design firm. And she puts it into a very captivating perspective. Kay says that, corporate real estate and FM are really being set up for failure, with the onus being put on them to create spaces where people want to be. But she kind of goes on to say, we're not really addressing the real problem. In decades past, people went to school, they got a 4-year degree, and that was supposed to carry them for 30 years on to retirement. And now you're lucky if a 4-year degree holds you for about 5 years, because you're having to go out and learn new things. And today we're not just working 30 years, it's more like 40 or 50 years. And to my earlier point, I have about 4.5 decades of work life on me, so I'm older than I look. But decades ago, people may have put in long hours, but when they left the office, they left work. And that doesn't happen anymore. We're failing to acknowledge that in the way that we're working, for the period that we now have to work, at the speed we need to get re-educated and re-skilled, and the fact that we're not just working 8 hours anymore, it's impacting our entire life. So it's fundamentally changed. It's not sustainable anymore to work the way we've been working. And you're telling people to come back to something that was killing them in the first place, and not openly acknowledging that we need to do something differently. Kay says what we call hybrid is actually more of an operational model than a workplace model. So you can create the most amazing spaces on the planet, but if you're not treating the people well, you don't have policies to support them, and you're driving for an hour to go sit on Zoom calls all day. I don't care how many croissants you give them in the office, they're not coming back. Again, we're not addressing those main issues. Work and work life have fundamentally shifted, radically, and it's not sustainable to keep doing what we've been doing. So that's my thoughts on that one.
No, sure. And I think just an interesting, obviously, I think your viewpoints on something that's been killing them, obviously that's like the extreme, but valuable. What I have also seen is that, and especially as I mentioned, I'm talking about some of the cities in India, that when people do hybrid, I think one of the things apart from obviously the work, if the nature of their job makes it possible, is like the savings on the commute time. And obviously, been running this business of office commute, which we figured it out that on average, if you sort of work alternate days to the office, around 3 days in a month is what gets added back to your additional time which you get by saving on commute. So I think in some of the places where the commute time is high, that also kind of gives an additional incentive for the employers to think of giving some flexibility to the workforce.
Yes. And I don't know if it was you or someplace else, but I think that worked out to be something like 19 or 20 hours a week that people could actually reclaim for, their home life, to be with their kids and so forth. So it's a big difference. And some people actually end up just working those hours. So you're actually getting more, the company is getting more productivity out of some of those individuals because they're doing things that they can't possibly do when they're commuting. So there's definitely an argument for both sides.
No, absolutely. There's an argument for both sides, and hybrid is certainly complex than just the work from home or work from the office. So let me just with that, what problems do you think employers are trying to solve with the return to office?
That's an excellent question. In my mind, organizations must first ask themselves, what are their core concerns and objectives? Is it innovation? Is it customer service? Is it speed to market with their products? All of those have different influences again on what's my argument or what's my need for having people return to office. Each of those concerns will influence their return to office strategy. If you take, for example, innovation, this is something we've not figured out how to do effectively over Zoom calls. You need to create the environment for spontaneous innovation and ideation to occur, which in most cases requires people to be in the same place at the same time. If the employer understands the needs of the workers, they can likely strike a bargain where people will gather in the office, certain days of the week. And that's when those in-person meetings occur. I have a colleague, he's a CEO of a company, and he schedules himself in their company office 2 to 3 days a week. But when he's in the office, he's meeting with his team, he's meeting with clients, he's meeting with suppliers. And he even went on to say that he feels guilty if he takes a video call when he's actually in the office because he feels like he's cheating. That he's wasting his time that could be for in-person and face-to-face opportunities. So I don't believe there's really a one-size-fits-all answer, but whatever one reason is why some people, they seem to be struggling with this is I think that there's lots of different motivations, and they have to really get down to what is the company's motivation, and then what can they offer, what can they bargain, can they bring with their employees in order to bring those people back for that innovation to occur. And I think back on my own work experiences, and even when I spent 5 days a week in the office, there was only a certain amount of time that I was meeting in person with people. It was often on calls or heads down, writing, doing other kinds of things. And so only a portion of that time was really spent in that in-person interaction anyway. So the only thing that we've changed is the location where that occurs.
We will certainly, I've taken a note of it. We will certainly discuss about the innovation part, because I think a lot of the argument is being that innovation with work from home. So we'll certainly discuss about it. But I think just from that point of what you said, that what's the motivation of the employers, I just wanted to share 2 data points, and that's just because of the technology which we implemented, and we got some insights into it. One of the company, which is a retail company, which has an office of around 5,000 employees, when they did return to the office, using the technology, they enabled like in-office dining options for the employees. I think it was available pre-COVID in a limited manner, but they sort of added more options, made it a little more glamorous, and employees could choose they want to have like an Indian lunch, or they want to have a Italian lunch, etc. So kind of they wanted to give this experience to the employees, and the employees had this option to choose, and obviously they could then decide how much food to order depending upon their demand. So that was one use case which we thought where they wanted to create a great experience for the employees. The second use case, which in a different scenario, we saw 2 companies, both more than 10,000 employees, they were expanding during COVID, and they sort of wanted to reduce the real estate footprint per employee. So they wanted to use some kind of hoteling or hot desking technology, so that if the employees are coming only alternate days or 2 days in a week, their assets, desks, parkings, etc., could be reutilized, and hence the real estate footprint could reduce. So as you rightly said, Dean, depending upon what was the motivation of the employer, they sort of executed it that way.
There's another thought related here that this is something that I think was happening even pre-pandemic, and that we have sort of a gap in what I call managerial skills and knowledge across industries. People are promoted into management and supervisory positions with little or no experience, and they don't have the mentoring options. One of the opportunities was that you promote somebody into a position, and then you have in person, in an office, you have more experienced people that can work with them to help them become a good and effective manager. Well, now if your manager's on the other side of the world, 12 hours different, like we are, it's much harder to get that mentoring in. So, a poor manager can create a lot of undue stress for employees, and it can cost the company some very high value talent. So, you don't want to promote people into roles they're not ready to take, especially if it affects the livelihood of an entire team, because it can really backfire. So that's another one that I would say it's a related, but not directly related.
Yeah.
People who are working remotely and you have managers who have never managed people and they're trying to do it remotely, I think are at a significant disadvantage on how to effectively help those people in their job, help them thrive in their job, and even for that individual to thrive in their role. So just another little piece that we have yet to figure out in this new world of hybrid.
Yeah, no, sure. No, with that, Dean, with those thoughts, how should an organization then decide their goals?
I think that becomes more a question about strategy versus tactics. The pandemic certainly caused most organizations to change their tactics, but did they really change their strategy? I've not seen any studies on this, but I'm not aware that any companies really changed their fundamental strategy as a result of COVID. General Motors is still building cars, and Apple is still pushing out new iPhones every 18 months, whether we need them or not. Organizations react to the changing business conditions all the time, whether it was an economic downturn like 2008, labor markets, or other industry disruptions. COVID is just one that has been more widespread. I believe employers and employees will eventually find some common ground, and organizations will continue with the goals they pursued all along. Just like General Motors does not build cars in the same way it did in the 1950s, organizations are going to find new ways to meet their goal objectives in the 2020s.
No, sure. And let's now kind of switch gears to the workplace design. What kind of a holistic workplace design and approach should the organizations then take?
I think it's really a matter of actually putting holistic workplace design into practice. For the most part, architects and engineers create buildings independent from the interior designers who create the spaces for the intended occupants. And those interior designers really only get a hint of how the space is going to be used by the occupants. And now those occupants are actually more conscious of workplace wellness and well-being concerns. So the design, construction, and interior activities, have really occurred more or less in silos, and they need to come together into a more holistic and life cycle approach. If I take the ASHRAE 62.1, which is the indoor air quality standard, it suggests a minimum requirement of 3 air changes per hour, which is pretty much what gets designed into most air handling systems. But it turns out that the optimal air changes per hour is more like 6. But those systems can't simply be dialed up to handle 6 air changes if they were designed for 3. So it requires, that requires the system to be re-engineered. We have a lot of long-held common knowledge interior design criteria around indoor air quality and access to natural light, stable temperatures, and humidity control. But that really must start with architecture and engineering and carry through into that and be integrated with the interior design. But that really leaves us with that question too about, does workplace design impact well-being? There is some design, evidence that design and color elements can either induce calm or invoke stress, in the workplace. But, well-being is more aligned to what I'm discussing in the first question about, is the employer doing anything to address that work and work life differently? The most amazing workplace in the world cannot counteract a toxic work environment.
Oh, absolutely. While you are on it and we were talking about the workplace design, I just want to take up this one question. There are multiple, and we'll certainly do that. But this one question, which is sort of related to design, from Anthony, is that what is the best option for office layout for hoteling in 2023 for the next 5-year plan? I'm assuming 5-year plan. Yeah. So what's the best options for office layout for hoteling in 2023, if you're looking at the next 5 years?
I think if I had that answer, I'd write a book and retire. Again, it goes back to, what's the purpose of the space? What is the intent? What do those people need to come together to do? Whether the model is hoteling or just open office, there's usually some requirement that says, I need a space for myself to sit, where I can make a phone call, where I can do some heads down work by myself. I need some spaces where I can gather together with 2 or 3 people because we need to do some collaboration. Or I need a larger space where I need to get 20 people together so that we can talk about this latest project. So it still goes back to, what are the different spaces you need for different purposes? And then, if the model is going to be hoteling and you want to make the spaces available to be reserved, and then I think you talk to Deepesh about that, because he's got the solutions. But
Sure.
there are solutions. There are technologies available to provide those kinds of things. And again, that's a tactic. That's not I don't call that even a strategy. It's a tactic on how a company is going to make those spaces available for the people that will be coming in to use them.
No, sure. In fact, while obviously we certainly have the technology for hoteling, but what we realized, and this was just an insight, that when we worked with our clients, the way we thought, and actually you did bring this up, is we all thought that when people want to do individual focused work, they'll work from home, and they're coming to the office to only meet people. That was kind of the original thought with which we thought. But then we figured it out that as people started coming, and maybe this is true for some places in India, homes are small, so a lot of people were coming to the office even for focused work. So it's not that just because you're in the office, all the places have to be collaborative spaces or meeting rooms. Even in the office, you need all these no disturb zone, focus zones as well. So sort of just some learning, which as we figured it out, that the return to office kept increasing.
Yeah, I mean, I know from my own personal, I don't do well if I'm sitting in an open office environment where there's a lot of conversations and noise going on. I can't do heads down. I can't do writing or things that requires a lot of focus in that environment. It's too distracting for me. And they say, well, put on headphones. Well, that only works to a certain degree. It's still distracting because you have people walking by. It's still catching your attention and taking you away from your focus. So the isolation spaces, where even having a small room, just a small space where somebody can go in, close a door, and be a little more isolated, helps. But you don't want to build a whole office of those.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, it goes back to, what's the purpose of the office? What kind of work do these individuals do? And how much of it requires that focus time, and try to balance space based on the mix of people or how the work actually occurs.
Sure. As I said, probably we will try to see if we can take more questions, but I'll just continue with our discussion, Dean, here, that how do you address technology, or how is technology getting used in all this? And how do we ensure that this is solving the problems for which the organizations are looking to solve by the use of technology?
Well, as I mentioned, I started my career in IT. I have more technology background than most, but what I look for in workplace technology is I tend to look at how frictionless the experience is for the individual worker. And with cybercrime threats being what they are, it's difficult to have a totally friction-free environment. But the technology exists to make it possible for individuals to have access to their work environment from any location with network connectivity, for them to freely or move seamlessly from one resource to another through like single sign-on capabilities. to minimize that dreaded multi-factor authentication productivity killer, through authentication apps and other means to make sure that you're secure, but not disrupting your workflow every 5 minutes to authenticate something. And then there's the embedded encryption for files and network connectivity wherever possible if there is an increased need for that security and privacy. So there are ways to do that. Now that puts more requirements on the IT organization to have a comprehensive technology plan, and those kind of plans are not inexpensive. However, if you consider the potential productivity impact across a large employee body, the cost can easily be justified just by that productivity savings for those individuals. So ideally, there should be no difference in the technology experience from the office to the home office or any other third place.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I think the question which I have, and maybe I'll just a little background to that is, I think a lot of technology with work from office, apart from security and privacy, is around collaboration technology. Obviously, we're using one of them, Zoom. There's Microsoft investing heavily in Teams. One of the things which I think you brought earlier during discussion was around innovation, product innovation. So I think I want to ask you, Dean, that factors like product innovation and also customer satisfaction are highly disrupted due to this remote model. How do we address that? And just one more, actually, from the audience, I have a question which is related. So I just want to bring it up here. It's from Jonathan. And this is related. How do we measure abstract concepts like innovation, mentoring to decide how to adjust work environment and arrangements? So maybe just two questions here, Dean. The first is factors like product innovation and customer satisfactions are disrupted by the remote model. And the second is, how do we demystify these concepts of innovation and mentoring, and how do we adjust these environments which we operate in?
Well, let's just take the customer satisfaction. Yeah. So assuming that any organization that's concerned about that must have some means of measuring customer satisfaction and getting some feedback about what about that customer experience did they like or not like? And then how does that relate to how the customer service experience is being delivered? So, if they are getting feedback from their customers that they don't like the customer service experience, what is it? Was it the person was not knowledgeable? Was it that they were in a noisy environment, they kept getting distracted and couldn't hear what that person was saying? Or they were hard to get in touch with, had to go through too many phone calls or technical loops to even reach somebody. So by the time that they get on with one of the customer service agents, they're just irate anyway. How many times have we had that experience? So I think armed with that information and what those challenges are, that's where you can go back and start making some adjustments to how that customer service experience is being delivered. Because in most cases, I don't know when I'm either calling somebody or getting on a chat, I don't know where that individual is. Yeah. They could be sitting in their living room in their pajamas. And I don't care, as long as I get my needs met. If I can get to them quickly, if I get to the right person in a timely manner and get my questions or my issues resolved, I'm a happy customer. But if you start finding that, no, they had to transfer me 3 times, and the call got dropped twice, during those transfers, and the person that I ended up talking to really wasn't knowledgeable and could not solve my problem, that's really, I think, what they end up dealing with is not so much about where it's being served up from, but how are they meeting those customer needs? And I think, product development is probably in that the same kind of issue. If you're having trouble either designing, building, or shipping your products, where is that coming from? And what are those issues? Talking about, innovation, just briefly. So everybody looks at Google. when Google was founded, what they found was that, their success really centered around a small group of talented people coming together, and innovation occurred spontaneously but randomly. It was just, they would be talking or something would happen, and all of a sudden they would make some sort of a breakthrough idea. And so they started organizing more of the company around that concept. When they would hire new teams, they had to be in the office. They would give them a space. They would give them a room that this team would exist in. And they were free to design that room any way they wanted. They could put in beanbag chairs. They could put in, wild colors on the walls. They could do anything they wanted, as long as, the team came together and met their needs. Now, did that really scale up across everything? Maybe not, but they found that they had a lot of success with that. But the real key was that their idea or their measure of innovation could not be scheduled or dictated. It happened when it happened, and it happened by bringing together the right people working on the right problem, and innovation would occur. So that was their finding, in the early days of Google. And I don't know that that's really changed that much. Is that I still don't think that there's ways that we can schedule or mandate innovation. I think it happens. If you and I were in the same room and having this conversation, we might walk out in the hall and continue our conversation between the two of us. And we might come up with a brilliant idea that says, something you said made me think about this, and here's an idea that we can work on. That doesn't happen when a Zoom call ends, because for the most part, everybody turns off the camera and goes back to whatever they were doing. So the opportunity for spontaneous innovation and ideation really isn't there in the remote work model. And we haven't figured out how to replace it with the in-person interaction.
I would not just agree, I would sort of strongly agree. And just as an example of that, this product Work in Sync, which we developed during COVID, was actually the time which we got all of us, a bunch of guys, to go to the office, do the whiteboarding, brainstorm it, and sort of turn it around very, very quickly. I don't think so any way we could have done it in any other remote way possible. So I certainly am a big believer that for innovation, I understand somebody said it has to be demystified. I certainly can't do it, but I would certainly agree that this innovation and hustle, for it to happen, you sort of need that face to face.
We have the electronic whiteboard products now, but for the life of me, I can't draw a straight line with my mouse to it doesn't work as well. So at least it doesn't look very pretty when we do it on the electronic whiteboards.
Yeah. So with that, Dean, I think we have a lot of questions. I'll see how many we can take up. I'll start. The first one is from Sharon. Obviously, there was so much chatter about the Great Resignation or the demand to work from home or I quit. So that's the background. What happened to the employer creating the rules around where and when to work? And if the staff doesn't like, they don't have to work. So I don't know what's the...
this is really more of a
comment.
Something that's a factor of the times. We were at a very low point of unemployment. People felt more empowered to be able to say, I won't do this, or I choose not to do this, because there were opportunities, and lots of opportunities. They could actually go someplace else. Now that's sort of that grass is always greener on the other side mentality, because you don't know when you go to a new environment whether or not the work environment is going to be any better. Did you ask all the right questions before you accepted that new job to figure out if they're going to accommodate your individual needs, and does that actually happen when you get there? I think some companies were trying to make mandates. And some of that was maybe based on the fact that they've operated in this hybrid environment for a couple of years, but they also know that they can't survive long term in that way. They need either people back in the office just based on what they do and how they do it. And so they had to come out and say, we do need people to come back to work. Now, some people saw that as a mandate. Some employers just saw that as, this is the needs of our business. We hired you to do a particular job, and I need you to do that job here. And so if you can't come to some agreement there, then yes, maybe it's time to part ways and go look for another opportunity that meets your individual needs. And then they can go look for somebody that's willing to accommodate your business needs. So again, not a single or a simple solution. I think employers that are just putting out a mandate that says, come back to the office or else, that is a poor strategy. They need to at least be able to explain why it's important. And maybe think about what are the incentives, what can they do to help offset the issues or the productivity issues around people losing time at home. What can they do to help them with that? And those employers probably get a better response from their employee body, than the Elon Musks that are telling the Twitter employees, come back or resignation accepted.
No, I totally agree that explaining the point of view would certainly help. Absolutely. There's a question from Michael. Is it possible that digital transformation of workplace is being inhibited by relying on a built environment built for a somewhat different employer and workforce needs, something which I think you spoke about earlier? Now that we have an opportunity to architect a new level of distributed workplace models and networks, do we need to create this new level of infrastructure? If so, what groups need to come together to create better places to work?
I think that really is sort of a discussion around the evolution of a technology or technologies. I've been around for quite a while, and I remember when the cell phone first arrived. And there were lots of predictions that basically everybody was going to have a cell phone within 2 years. Didn't quite happen that way. It happened over a little longer period of time to reach what we would call commodity status. And it looked very different than what was being predicted. So I think there are lots of interesting technologies that are coming out. I mean, I've seen some phenomenal things using holographic virtual presence. But again, the hardware, the infrastructure, everything that is needed to support that really isn't there yet. These are very, very isolated examples and demonstrations using some very sophisticated technologies that is really not what I would call mainstream technology at this point. So you see that where the vision of the future. I think Microsoft put out the first laptop probably in the late, I want to say the 1990s, but it was too big, it was too heavy, and it performed poorly because the hardware really wasn't there yet. It was another 15 or so years before the MacBook Air came out. That's this almost as thin as paper and lightweight and has reasonable performance. So people will get a glimpse of what's coming and what is possible, but it takes a good, say, 5 to 10 years before a lot of these technologies mature to become what I would call commonplace or reach that commodity status where everybody has access to it, everybody can use it. And you probably have some thoughts on that as well, having been through this. But I think there's lots of interesting things that are in the technology spaces today. Many of them will not survive. They will not carry forward. A few of them will mature and become more accepted. and become commonplace in the office, but it may be 5, 6, 7 years down the road before we see that.
Yeah. Just like initial technology will have an excitement, everybody will feel that yes, it's got to become commonplace very quickly, but then there's going to be dip, and then there will be eventually a stable state equilibrium. So yeah, absolutely right. What I just want to kind of read out this comment from Lisa. She sort of made a comment and an observation on the Google team examples. What Dean is describing with the Google teams creating their own environments is choice and flexibility, and that is directly tied to higher employee engagement. There are fantastic innovation methods, and one of them is closed loop system of systematic inventive thinking, SIT, and that can be done in person or remotely. So I guess Lisa's point of view is at least certainly different from mine, and yours as well.
I think that's Lisa Whited.
Yes.
Hi, Lisa. Lisa and I were just on a call right before this one. Lisa is absolutely correct. She is actually one of the thought leaders in this space. Has a book that just came out, and does, I mean, that's what she works on. And so she has some very good insights on where we need to go. And the problem, like I said, having the insight and then making that commonplace across a large scale organizations, culture change is hard. Technology moves much faster than adoption. Those are two different curves. And I think in this case, the thought about where we need to go as organizations and as people, we have some great thought, and there's that curve, but the adoption curve, with culture and organization, it is a different curve, and it's a longer curve. So I think we will see those things evolve. I think we will start solving some of that. How do we innovate remotely? I think those things will occur, but it's changing behavior. I've operated, 60 some odd years in a certain way. And so even though I realize there are better ways of operating, it's very hard to change behavior. And I think that's with most people. You grew up in a certain way. Organizations have developed behaviors themselves. It's hard to change organizational behavior. It doesn't happen overnight. It can be done, but it takes a concentrated effort and persistence and patience on the part of the leadership to move that in that new direction and make sure everybody is coming along with you.
Sure. Thanks, Dean, and thanks for your views, Lisa. I actually see there are a lot of questions. We certainly can't take those, and in fact, there's a lot of conversation between Michael and David. I'll just take this last one, and for everybody else, Preeti is going to send you a thank you note from the registered email, and certainly you can ask the questions, but we would love to hear out your views as well. I'll just take this last question from Louis Santana. How do facilities manager make the argument for added personnel while buildings are no longer operated under the business hours model, especially since employees are now visiting buildings at random hours, including weekends?
That is a good question that a lot of people in the facilities and real estate organization are trying to answer. Through the 1980s, we went through that period of, doing more with less. So reducing staff, making people try to do more. So we're already understaffed in many cases. We don't have enough people to do everything that needs to be done. So, I always go back to some of the basics of being able to track what is being done and what's not being done because we don't have the resource for it. Having facts and data to present to say, this is what we're missing out on. We're not getting our systems maintained, or we're not providing the level of service to those employees who are working at all hours and delivering productivity, delivering the revenue generating capabilities for the business. but we don't have enough staff to support them when and where they're doing their work. So it's really making sure that you're collecting all that data as you go along, having a good basis, understanding what assets you're managing, how much work is being put into it today, what are the impacts of not maintaining some of the equipment. Are you getting equipment failures that's causing disruptions to the office environment? And are you not able to support people because you're only staffed 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, but you literally have staff there 24 hours a day that need help in those nights and weekends or need something, and there's nobody there to support them. You have to lean sometimes on calculating what was the productivity hit, what was the productivity cost, and calculating, what did it detract from people being able to get their work done. It's harder to do, but you can actually calculate how much productivity was affected by an item or a disruption, and then calculate what was the dollar cost of that. And pretty soon, if you have enough evidence, enough data, you can say, I could have saved you, $300,000 in productivity if we had a $70,000 person on staff doing this. It's a harder argument because, again, it's a leap of faith that you would actually get that productivity back. It's why you need good facts and data. It has to be believable. But I've used that many times in my career, but only after I was able to collect enough data to substantiate where we were missing out on opportunities, and that it was actually costing us money rather than saving us money because we weren't staffed at a particular level.
Sure. Dean, thank you so much. We're sort of at the top of the hour, sort of exceeded it by a few minutes. So it was great to chat. And I think I totally agree that whatever is happening now, it's a new future which is getting unfolded. We're not going to certainly return to the industrial era of all 5 or 6 days work week. Earlier, it was full-time work from office. Now it was remote, and now something new is coming up. I probably would just end with this comment that from Lisa, actually, that I think of workplace is one large petri dish of habits, a lot of opportunity for the future for all of us. So have a good day, Dean, and thank you, everyone. We will send you a note and would love to hear your comments. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day and good night.
Me to speak.
Bye-bye.